July is finally here, and that means we are now just weeks away from Commanders training camp. No better time to get our guy, Lake Lewis Jr., on the program. Does a great job covering the team as our Commanders and our NFL insider. Lake, always good to see you. I hope you've been enjoying your summer and this little downtime that we have.
Oh, I have been, and I'm getting ready. Obviously, I'm sure you are as well for training camp that's coming up. And congrats to you because I saw you on a trip, and it looked
Yes.
like you were having a lot of fun.
Yes, we are rested, we are recharged, and we are gonna soak in these last remaining weeks we have until we lock in. And the thing is it's been hot enough here in DC where it kind of feels like training camp is quickly approaching. So we'll be hopefully a little used to that when we're gonna be outside for several hours. But before we get into training camp, I kind of want to set the stage because it's been a rather boring off season. And I know a guy like you who has been covering this team for so long, we're not taking
Mhm.
that for granted, are we?
No, not at all. I mean, this is what you wish for, like we said, both of us coming off trips and, retooling and, years past, Natalie, let's face it, we would have been somewhere and still having to cover, bad news that was happening with this team. And it seemed like we could never escape that dark cloud that was over the facility. Well, now it's different. And, the big talk, of course, is Terry McLaurin and his contract extension. But if that's the only thing that you can talk about, anyone can talk about, that's a good sign that, things are really working well in Washington.
100%. And I'm glad you brought up Terry because as we creep closer to training camp, I know there's this level of concern that might be brewing, especially in a lot of maybe commanders' minds,
Mhm.
especially now that we're seeing kind of some of those national outlets saying, no update is perhaps not a good update at this point. But I'm curious to see what your take is on this.
Yeah, I don't buy that. I've been saying for a long time, Terry McLaurin is a Washington Commander for life, and I think Adam Peters, if you and I know anything about Adam, is that he does want a culture, a positive culture. He wants hardworking players. He wants guys that don't get in trouble off the field, that produce at a high end on the field. And if you looked up a Washington Commanders player in the dictionary to fit all those descriptions, his face would be Terry McLaurin. So why would you want to get rid of the one guy that's gone through hell and back for this organization when it's his time to make money? Because let's face it, he had his best year last year when he had a legit quarterback. So it's time for them to take care of him.
Okay, I was going to ask you kind of what your timeline of all of
Yeah.
this is, and if there is a point where maybe your level of concern would raise a little bit. But if we're waiting a couple more weeks at this point, I think a lot of Commanders fans, their minds are now at ease. I don't want to play hypotheticals, but I kind of want you to look into your crystal ball because the one thing that training camp always, something that sparks a memory with training camp is the kids and their incessant yelling of Terry McLaurin. That is, it just plays in my mind every single year. And that's why I want to pose the question of what do you think this fan base would be, the reaction of this fan base would be if Terry McLaurin is not suiting up for this team this season?
Not good. I mean, they'd be a little heartbroken, as they should be, because like we said, he's the one guy that's been the consummate pro for a bad situation for years. And, you saw how happy he was. Think about it, Natalie. Last year, we couldn't get that guy to stop smiling. Every time you talked to him or saw him, he was cheesing from ear to ear because he had never experienced that as a professional. He did in college at Ohio State. So, you want to see a guy like that rewarded. But I do think that the fan base is nervous because, they're not hearing much. But, it would just shock me if Coach Quinn and Adam did not bring this guy back.
I want to segue now into training camp. Again, a few weeks out at this point. It's been a quiet off season, but when we do lock in, we're going to be out there in Ashburn every single day, locking in on this team and watching them. What specific things are really going to be catching your eye specifically?
Well, I've been talking about it frequently. The speed of this team has changed drastically. They're going to be a lot faster than years past. And I also think the size of the team is going to look different. When you look at now them in the trenches, with Laramie Tunsil on the offensive line and Josh Connerly Jr., those are large men. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Dedrick Wise, Javon Kinlaw, Eddie Goldman, you add those guys to the defensive line, those are space eaters. They're all 300 plus pounders. So I just think the speed and size of this team is going to look markedly different from what we've seen in years past.
And what do you think is now the biggest question heading into training camp? You mentioned the D line, mentioned the O line, some of these different position groups. The O line was the kind of the big question mark last year heading into training camp. What was this group going to look like with all of those new pieces? They essentially kind of answered the bell once we got ready for the season and what we saw them, produce on the field. What do you think is the biggest question heading into this year's training camp, however?
Well, I mean, I think you have to find a replacement right now for Sam Cosmi. I think you have to find who's going to be his starting replacement in the interim. And for me, I think it might be Trenton Scott. I thought he played well in replacement of Sam last year. Nick Allegretti will have an opportunity. Brandon Coleman's being moved in the inside now as a guard. I don't think not on the right side, but on the left side. So there's going to be some availability and some players battling for that starting
Oh,
spot.
yeah. And if one thing we could take from this mini camp a couple of weeks back was that competition is still what is being stressed from this coaching staff. So we're going to have to see how all of those pieces kind of fall into play. Blake Lewis Jr., you're at the absolute best. Thanks so much for joining us.
I appreciate you, Natalie.
All right. Stay with us. We've got more to go to.